Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doctors Making a Difference. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Crane. I'm a physician in rural Idaho where I've been in practice since 2011. Over the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to be both a physician and a patient, and I've been so thankful for the doctors and other healthcare professionals who have helped me. I invite you to join us as we highlight physicians around the world who are making a difference in their communities and with their patients. Our goal is to give physicians and other healthcare professionals the tools they need to be successful in medicine, in finances, and in life. What we do makes a tremendous difference for our patients and our communities. Please go to your podcast service or YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review and hit the like or subscribe button. It helps get the message out to others. You can also check out more content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Finally, if you would like to be on the show or have any questions or topics that you feel should be addressed on the show, please contact me. The easiest way to get in contact is to subscribe to the newsletter and then hit reply to any of the newsletter emails. Welcome to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. Hey everybody, today we have my friend Jared Pelo. Jared, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience today?
Yeah, Peter, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and to have this discussion with you. So, I grew up in Utah. I went away to college, the University of Virginia, and then back to the University of Utah where I did medical school, and Peter and I met. And I decided to do emergency medicine, and I did my residency at the University of Virginia and took my first job at a private practice about an hour south of where I did my residency in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is this kind of a smaller town, but also a big hospital. We would see 100,000 patients in our emergency department every year, which at the time was the second busiest emergency department in Virginia. And I did that for, 7 years at either the big hospital or some of the smaller hospitals. And during that time, got the entrepreneurship bug, did some stuff there, and still kind of work in the tech space. And now I run a small direct primary care clinic along with some tech business stuff that I do.
That's pretty awesome, Jared. I've kind of followed your career just from afar on social media, or we have mutual friends, and I think it's pretty cool. So you've changed from just purely like clinical medicine, ER medicine, and you've got this entrepreneurship on the side. That's makes a big difference for the people who are taking advantage of that. So, but I want to come back to that. Do you mind kind of talking us through, like, kind of go way back? Why did young Jared choose medicine in the first place? Because I think that's
Yeah.
a touch point all of us have to reflect back on once in a while. Like, why did I get into this crazy game? Medicine is such a unique, fulfilling, and demanding career. So I'd be interested to hear your story.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I was a terrible student. I mean, not terrible. I was not failing, but if you looked at like my rank in my class, and it was a big high school, it was Orem High School. We had, I think, 800 people in my class, and I was probably like 300, 400, like just middle of the pack, average guy. I loved sports. I thought I was going to do physical therapy, so we had some like trainer classes and stuff like that. But then right after high school, I went and served an LDS mission. And on that 2-year mission, I was in Argentina, northern part in the jungle, and working in hospitals and doing some service. And I had a friend there, and his dad was an ER doctor, and he would tell me that he wanted to be a physician as well. And funny enough, when I was in med school, he was doing his residency at Primary Children's. But he was going to be a physician. I started thinking, about serving and how much I loved serving, and the idea of choosing a profession where I could feel like I was serving others every single day just sounded really great. And so when I finished my mission, I was telling my dad that I wanted to be a doctor, and he laughed at me because he was like, "You're
Really?
you're the he's like, you're the worst student of all my kids."
Holy cow.
And but I was determined, but that was kind of the impetus for wanting to be a physician.
That's pretty cool. That's funny if even if your own dad laughed at you. Well, so then how did you decide to do it? I mean, you took this
Yeah.
journey, and I think in hindsight, all of us can look back on that decision and say, oh, yeah, I became a doctor because I did X, Y, and Z. But there's
Yeah.
so many steps to say, okay, I had to take the MCAT and I had to get some core classes. And, all of us along the way have a few classes where you're like, oh, I wasn't so good at this one. I got to go touch up on that a little bit better. And some people are just straight A students from the
Yeah.
very beginning, and others have fits and starts. And how did you decide to pursue it? Because it's a lot of persistence to stick through that path.
It was tough. And when I started school, I was at Utah Valley University, or Utah Valley State College at the time. And I did my first 2 years there, and I ended up meeting my wife. She was at BYU, and at the time, I I didn't really want to go to BYU. I'd grown up in Orem, so right by BYU. I didn't really want to go to the University of Utah or Utah State, and she was from Virginia. So at the time, Virginia had 3 medical schools. Utah had 1 medical school. And I was like, I'm going to transfer to the University of Virginia, finish out there, and get into medical school in Virginia. That was the
Right.
plan. And of course, ended up coming back to the Utah for medical school. But even undergraduate, you have all sorts of decisions. What do you major in? I started as a biology major, but then I switched to religious studies at the University of Virginia, and that was partly because I was working in this lab all the time. So was getting great microbiology and biology kind of stuff, bunch of published papers. It was all great for my resume, but I was kind of bored with that and wanted to like do more with college. So I studied, it was right after 9/11. So I studied Islam, Christianity. That was super cool. And I probably never would have got into the University of Utah if I hadn't gone to UVA because for some reason, the University of Utah bumped up my GPA 25% because I was coming from what they considered a top tier school.
That's all.
And also,
That's a great gift. That's wonderful.
right? Exactly. Exactly. Also, I was considered out of state for that first year, which was a little more expensive for 1 year, but then I was able to convert to an in-state. So, yeah, I mean, so many decisions and how many different ways to do it. MCAT. Luckily, I only had to take that once. Didn't have to redo too many classes. Definitely not a straight line because it took me a year to get residency in Virginia, and then I spent another year just doing research. So I was a little bit slower to get through, but eventually, it's like you said, though, you have to make step after step, decision after decision. Yes, I still want to do this thing because it's so much work to get there.
Yeah. Well, and like I said before, I think for me, it's useful to go back to those times and say, why did I do this?
Hmm.
Because you've worked emergency medicine, and I work in a small town. I was on the emergency room last night, and sometimes you're there at 2 in the morning dealing with some crisis, and you think, why am I not in bed? Everybody else is asleep. But I
Right.
think it's helpful for me to reflect and say, okay, this is why I've chosen to
Yeah.
do this, and it's really because I want to help people. I wanted to do it. It had that has to still be the motivation that gets me still get up in the morning and go help people. That's for me. That's the thing that motivates it. What's the thing that I guess drove you to do emergency medicine, and kind of what's still your core that keeps you going?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to your point that helping that individual patient um, is just I think that's cornerstone. And really, I think when you talk to most physicians, that remains the cornerstone. It's why they show up, even when they're burned out or they're struggling, or even though they know they don't get to give that patient as much time as they want. The reason they keep showing up is because the core is serving that one individual. And so I chose emergency medicine for a couple different reasons. One, I I have a little bit of ADHD. And I mean, everybody says that. I don't really have ADHD, so I don't want to belittle anybody else's diagnosis.
No.
I I do not. I like diversity of knowledge and thought, and so I get distracted easily. And so emergency medicine was great because you get to do everything, kind of like family medicine, right?
Oh yeah.
And then the second thing is I was worried that I couldn't handle long-term relationships with patients. When I was going through medical school, I had some people die in the hospital that I had grown very attached to, and it was emotionally extremely difficult for me. And so I wasn't sure, if I could handle having a years long relationship with somebody and watching them die, or even months long. And in the emergency department, you're gaining rapport within minutes, and then often people are passing away and you're dealing with family members, but they're not people that you know deeply or closely. And so still, like, I remind myself anytime I have something difficult to do and I don't want to do it, what I'll usually say is, at least I don't have to tell somebody their kid died, because that's my least favorite thing I've ever had to do in my whole life.
Right.
But yeah, those were the reasons I chose emergency medicine. Is, somewhat selfish, thinking I couldn't handle the emotional stress of long-term relationships, and then I love the medicine, of the ER.
Yeah. Well, just kind of reflecting on that same thing. I saw one of my friends yesterday, and was thinking on that same thing. A couple of years ago, unfortunately, one of his children died in a car wreck, and I was in the ER, and it was hard. I mean, it's very
Yeah.
hard to tell somebody that their loved one has passed away, especially a child. I think those are some of the most uh, deeply painful, difficult sort of circumstances. But I thought about that yesterday as I interacted with him in another setting, and I just, every time I see him, I think about that painful experience. But on the on the other side, I'm not sure he would have wanted anybody else to tell him that either, because
It's true.
it's very hard. And a couple of weeks ago, I had a another person I've cared for years, came to the ER, and passed away rather suddenly. And those are really challenging experiences, and I don't want to discourage anybody from going into medicine from that discussion. But I think it's all about the relationships, and I think about those things, and especially this one a couple of weeks ago, I was pretty. It was really challenging for me, but I put myself in the shoes of the person who was there, and I thought, this is a person I know, and we have a good relationship and of trust and a kind of a friendship with the family, and I've taken care of four generations of this family, and so while it was painful for me, I was also thankful to be there at that moment of challenge for them. And so I could sort of tell myself that at least I was there. And I think the family was grateful that I was the one that was there, even though maybe I wasn't so grateful that I was the one that was there when that happened. But I don't know,
I
Jared.
think that's such a gift on your part to give to people. So yeah, it's a gift, and then it's also the work that you have to do, that you can deal with that kind of emotional pain, emotional stress, and show up the next day, or even within minutes if you're in the ER, to keep giving that same level of care that you need to give.
Yeah. So do you have any, I was curious if you think of any stories of people you've taken care of. We got to be HIPAA compliant on anything, but
Sure.
do you have any stories of anybody that you've taken care of where you felt like you made kind of a big difference or an impact, or it made an impact on you? Anything you'd be willing to share?
Oh yeah. There's I'll share this story, because it was actually in the news, and so it won't have the same HIPAA
Yeah,
compliance
that's true. If you brought the details on the news.
issues. We had a nurse who was in a car accident right after shift, and came in. She had diffuse axonal injury. So for those who don't know, that's a tearing of the brain. So really thought that she was going to end up in a vegetative state. And, you know, a nurse who had, like I said, just been on shift and just actually came back from maternity leave, had two small children. And I ran that trauma when she came in. I went and visited her in the hospital, and one of the one of the most, miraculous recoveries I've ever seen. She was back in the ER 4 months later, working a shift.
Well, that's
And
incredible.
those moments where you know that your quick action, your training that you've been training for so many years, your expertise, your ability to execute, have a team around you that executes well, and then see an outcome that is like that, is just something you hold on to. It's those moments when you are at 2 a.m. dealing with something where you're like, why is this person even in the ER? You think about those other moments where you're like, what a privilege to be part of that moment in that person's life.
Yeah. And Jared, you and I were talking before we hit record today. I've shared it pretty broadly with our audience that I went through a tumor and radiation and a big surgery, and I just remember reflecting on that as I was laying in the hospital recovering from this huge surgery, and I had a nerve injury, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to walk. Just so many uncertainties at that point. Wasn't sure if it was a benign tumor or not. It was 26 centimeters, so it was a big one.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember there laying there thinking about that. Like this group of people who've dedicated their lives to take care of me have prepared for years for this moment, and literally hundreds of years of man hours of of education years of cumulative time that all these different people had put in, so that in that moment when it was my turn to receive that care, that I could receive it. And there was nothing else quite like it. And so you described that injury to this coworker, the nurse, and no doubt she was thankful that you were there that day because you had put in the time and the effort. And there's nobody else like it. There's nobody else that fills that role beyond a residency board certified physician, and it's just such a unique job. So I appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah. You bet.
So one of the other avenues I wanted to explore with you, Jared, is you've gone from exclusively clinical practice to some entrepreneurship, and I remember seeing your name pop up years ago. You were working on some of the voice recognition software and some of the things that make our documentation a little bit easier. And I'm just interested in how you got into entrepreneurship and how that plays in with your take on clinical medicine.
Yeah. The thinking back to that first startup that I started, so it was a decade ago. It was 2014, and uh, and I know that you like to talk about like finances
Oh yeah.
and physicians, and like part of what drove that, which I do not recommend this path for anybody as far as getting out of financial trouble, because this is actually the opposite of what you should do. But at the time, I had $350,000 in debt. I felt like I'd been practicing for 4 years, and I could just see the decades ahead of just more and more hours trying to pay that debt off. And so I actually thought in my crazy mind at the time, I think a startup and the possibility of making a large lump sum of money is a better bet than just doing this over the next decade. That was one thought. Then the other thought was I love to create things, and I love to work with small teams, and so that was the other reason. But I grabbed a college kid who he had just graduated. He was one of my medical scribes in the ER, and we started a company called iScribes where we recorded doctor-patient conversations, and then we used at the time remote scribes. So we started with people just working in their home, mostly like stay-at-home moms or
Hmm.
spouses of military who were highly educated but wanted flexibility in their job, and so they would work for us, write doctors notes, and doctors would sign them off. And then eventually we got acquired by Nuance Communications, who they make a product called Dragon. And then there we took all that data we had collected of recordings of doctors and patients and final notes, and we used that to train AI models. And now Microsoft owns the product, and it's called Dragon Ambient Experience. And tens of thousands of doctors use it every day for note writing. So it was very cool to go through that process.
Well, it is really cool, and I think that's probably where I saw it a few years ago. I'm like, wow, Jared's in the middle of this stuff, but you just had this idea, and your idea was sort of time compatible with where the technology was, and
Yeah.
it's great. I remember when you and I were in medical school, we started on paper,
Yep.
and you and I are the generation that switched from paper to computer right toward the end of medical school, and probably the same year experience. It was sort of a hybrid, and then by the end of residency, most things were electronic, and then a lot of the burnout related to documentation and the clunky emergency record system or medical record systems that came out. This last decade has been a little bit chaotic that way. And you got on the raw bleeding edge of that from a documentation standpoint. And truly, many people, like you said, tens of thousands have benefited from that technology, which is pretty cool, Jared.
Yeah, it's been super rewarding. I mean, so lucky, blessed. et cetera, to have been able to be a part of it. Of course, like I was just a small part of it, and but all the engineers, technologists, people that have worked with me throughout the years, but super rewarding to, like, I mean, I think as a physician, the person you need to focus on is the person in front of you. But when you can take that knowledge and you can apply it in a way that you can impact other physicians, then you kind of feel this exponential benefit that you can have, and that's really neat.
Well, first of all, your wife is really brave to let you try that out 4 years after residency. You know, and then the second thing is it's pretty cool that you actually had the idea and did it. So many people talk about things, but I mean that's kind of a unique thing when somebody's actually willing to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, and try it. And thankfully, it turned out to be a winner of an idea, which is pretty cool, Jared.
Yeah, it was touch and go, and it's possible that I invested our retirement without asking my wife, which I do not recommend.
No.
Absolutely do not recommend that. And at the time when we sold the company, I had taken out about $400,000 in personal loans. And even at the sale of the company, it was a young company, so I did okay, but I didn't like get rich. But I was able to pay off my student loans, so it worked. My crazy idea actually worked, but not something I would recommend because probably 9 out of 10 times that's going to fail.
Right, that's
So
the challenge. Just startups are a great idea, but yeah, if you invest all of your retirement, that sometimes you put everything on the line, and that's a little bit dangerous.
yes,
That is so
absolutely.
that's so cool. I've found, and I think most physicians have found that you have to use something besides just sitting there and typing out your notes. For the last few
Mhm.
years, I've used a Scribe service based out of India, and they are
Mm.
awesome. Like I just turn it on, and by the end of the day, all the notes are done, and it's called Physicians Angels. That's been a great program. But and I know that all the technology related to the ambient learning is just. I think that's going to come on and be sort of what future generations use, so that you're not spending 2 or 3 hours a day just sitting there documenting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we'll see more and more that physicians have to do less of the administrative burden, which is good. I mean, that's not what we trained for. We want to be taking care of people.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to reflect on this moment of time because every generation of doctors trains with their unique circumstances. But you and I, like I said, we sort of crossed from the paper to the computer, and somewhat forcibly, it was a mandate from the federal government that you do this, and so there was a big lag in the technology to actually make it efficient, and and then it compounded with the number of physicians who retired as a result of that. They said, I can't do this, or experienced burnout. And then I feel like that was already sort of boiling, and then the coronavirus pandemic happened, and a lot of our colleagues left medicine because of
Yeah.
that. They said, look, I can't be a secretary, I can't document and give face to face time with my patients and be excellent at being in my family and take the risks that are associated with working in an infectious disease environment. And I think a lot of people left, which is a real unfortunate, just a real unfortunate circumstance. So I was curious how how you see that in context of like managing burnout, and specific to your situation. Why have you stayed in medicine?
Well, and also I hope that some of our physician friends decide to come back as medicine gets better, or they decide in, there are alternative ways to practice medicine. So like I told you, I have this small direct primary care practice where and it's somewhat a privilege again to be able to spend more time with patients and take care of patients that can pay for that time. But for me, medicine is really a calling, like being part of this kind of society of men and women dedicated to helping others be healthier. I'm excited as we enter these next decades of technology and life and the ability for us to do more for our patients, and be more proactive and more predictive and help them be healthier. I think we all have that desire, and the interesting thing is as you know, is patients don't always want to listen to us.
Hmm,
Uh,
true.
um, it's like my wife says, she doesn't want to be a health coach. She wants to be a health or like a life coach. She wants to be a life designer. She doesn't want people just to listen to her. She wants people to do what she says.
Right.
And as a physician, I kind of feel that way too. Like I don't want to just give recommendations. I want people to do it so that they get healthier. Um, But in the end, just just having the opportunity to help people day after day in this profession, that's kind of what just keeps me super excited. And it touches everybody. Everybody, just like you had your health health system experience,
Yeah.
we will all have it. And to work on a problem that, you know, that we all have is also a really interesting thing.
Well, and I think just like, you've already touched on this, but I think going forward, what I hope is that we stop talking so much about everybody's burned out and everybody's leaving medicine and instead focus on the experience that people have, maybe focus less on RVUs and the timeliness of documentation, et cetera, and focus a little bit more on what relationship was formed and how did we get people from point A to point B so that they actually follow that advice. And then the second part of it is how do we take care of our doctors? Because like
Yeah.
I would love it if people came back to medicine and stayed in it. You can't trade the experience of someone that's been in medicine for 3 decades and for someone that just graduated or from someone who's done the PA or nurse practitioner track. It just the amount of experience that someone has with that kind of a training is just irreplaceable. So I hope that we design the experience to be a little bit more user friendly for the physicians so that they will stay and you be
Yeah.
part.
That's actually interesting. I'd never really thought like one of the outputs that would be really neat from an electronic health record would be like patient wins, like a report at the end of the week or the end of the month or the end of 6 months or a year to, Dr. Crane saying, look at all the good that you did in these people's lives. Because I think it's important for the physician to see that. And often we just see the obstacles or the people that failed therapy and something bad happened or but it's interesting to think like how can we design systems that we encourage doctors and help them feel even better about the work they do.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of work on value care organizations and things to measure some of those outcomes, but it is hard to measure. And in my view, the best way to get those kind of outcomes is to have it where physicians interact with patients and they have enough time. That's the hardest
Mhm.
part,
Yep.
and that they're not overburdened so much with the documentation piece of it that you forget why you're there. Um,
Yep.
Most people start off pretty altruistic. They want to help patients. You need to earn a good income because you spent a decade or more of your life uh, earning or learning to be able to be a physician. But we measure the things, or we improve the things that we measure. And right now we're measuring timeliness of documentation and how many units of relative value units you produce and things like that. And I just think that there's a lot of improvement for future generations, and I hope that we can leave medicine better than we found it. Is one of my hopes as we go forward.
Completely agree.
Um, Back to that question I asked you a little bit earlier. You took this side path of starting a entrepreneur sort of venture when you were 4 years out of residency. It sounds like. What advice would you give to somebody from a financial standpoint if you said, "Look, here's the building blocks that make it so that you can not find yourself so $350,000 in debt when you're in your 40s?" Because I know lots of docs who are still in that boat who say, I'm so in debt, I'm going to have to work till I'm 90 years old to pay this off. And I'm not working because it's fun. I'm working because I have to, because I feel like the sky is falling and all my financial ducks are not organized.
Yeah, I don't know that it's rocket science. It's just the good sound financial advice that you would normally receive with, maximize your retirement. If you're at a nonprofit, then you probably have, different retirement vehicles you can use as well as loan repayment vehicles. And then living within your means and figuring out like if you're at a nonprofit and you're going to get loan repayment in 10 years, then maybe you don't worry as much about paying it off as fast. But there's always the risk that the federal government changes their mind on some
Right,
of those
right.
programs. So that makes me really nervous for my friends who have kind of placed all their eggs in that basket. Um, but I think it comes back to, making financially sound commitments, not living above your means, investing in your retirement appropriately. Um, yeah, that's kind of my general advice.
Well, and I know we talked a little bit before. I feel that we are better docs or better doctors if we are not worried about the financial side of it so much. Everybody has some
Mhm.
debt. Most people have a mortgage or something along those lines. But I've noticed sometimes people finish the training and they've been in school till they're 33 or 34 or 35, and their family's been through a challenging time as they've done it. And then they get out and they say, okay, it's time for the nice house and the boat and the car that's, kind of newer, and let's go on a trip to Europe, and all those things are fun. But
Yeah.
if you jump right into it, it causes trouble. And the other problem is that because you spent so many years in training, your peers who've been working during that time and slowly, steadily saving toward retirement savings have a 12-year leap on you, and you
Yeah.
can't make it up by trying to join that lifestyle right off the bat.
Yeah. You know, the interest compounding time over
Right,
time,
right.
you can't beat it. If you start 12 years later, like, then you just have to get super serious about putting away that money.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you, Jared, specific. A lot of doctors get into this mindset, whereas I talk to people who say, I can't change. I'm the specialty I started. I must do this forever. I must work at this hospital in this setting. And I see it in rural medicine. That's been my avenue. I've got to work these crazy hours and be available all the time. And I couldn't possibly change anything because it's all I know. You've managed to do a little bit of a career switch where you still have
Yeah.
the emergency room background, but you've done more of a direct primary care route, and you've got involved in some technology companies. What would you tell someone who is feeling trapped?
Yeah, I would just tell them that they're not. Like, it is a decision. You have so many options. There's so many opportunities to retrain or up your knowledge skills, and really do whatever you want. Before you leave medicine, I would challenge you to try to find a place in medicine that feels better for you. If we are seeing a lot of people just cut hours. They go from 40 hours a week down to 26 hours a week or something, which is way better than quitting medicine. But even still, looking for places that get you excited about medicine, where you find it's interesting. I don't know that I would want to go back and do another residency. I know I have friends who have gone back who were pediatricians and now they're psychiatrists, and
Really? Wow,
yeah,
that's brave.
it is. It is. I'm not ready to do that kind of things, but I mean, the great thing about being a board certified physician is most of our boards are extremely flexible. Even though I don't practice emergency medicine, I keep on my board certification. I do all my CME, I do all my tests. And my board is happy to support me as long as I know the knowledge to work in the emergency department, even if I don't. And so, yeah, to me, it's, you have so many opportunities as a physician. If you're interested in tech, if you're interested in startups, there are a million startups out there that would love to have a doctor involved. They're probably not going to pay you to start because you don't really have the experience, but I would just say start volunteering with startups if you want to get to learn technology. And honestly, with the newer AI models that are coming out, you can learn how to code relatively easily. You can start building stuff on your own. So all sorts of interesting ways that you can get involved if you want to be involved in technology and medicine.
Yeah. Well, and that's and just to reflect on that, I've noticed people who are broadly trained. A lot of our residencies train us as internists, family docs, general surgeons, ER, and you have a lot of breadth, and so you're still really needed in whatever space you go to. And
Yep.
we, I would, I know a few years ago, I got to the point where I said, kind of like what you described, like I have to just make this lump sum of money and work like crazy so I can get out of debt, and then maybe I can retire early and be done with it. But I've transitioned over the last few years, partially because of my medical experience of going through that problem, and partially just my observation of time. Staying in the game longer is really the thing that's best for patients. And from a
Mm.
financial standpoint, you'll make a lot more money by working more years than you will by saving more money. Both things are important, but it sure is important to just stay in the game longer. And I feel bad that so many people left medicine, but I do hope people will return or consider staying. But we have to make the lifestyle such that it doesn't destroy our families or ruin the things that we're interested in doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think people understand how hard it is when they hear that a physician has 15 minutes to meet with them. They, of course, most people just feel bad for themselves, but the physician wants to give great care, and then when they finish that 10-hour day to those who aren't using a service to help with their documentation, then they go spend hours documenting. My partner in my direct primary care clinic, she was at Duke before, and she just talks about like it felt like it was never done, like there was never a time to take a breath. And we need to figure out like how do we help physicians not experience that? How do we help them actually enjoy the medicine they're practicing?
Yeah. Well, talk me through that for a minute. How did you decide on direct primary care, and how has that answered some of the concerns that you've noticed in the past with the time?
Yeah. I mean, direct primary care is really interesting. And when I started, it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't have called it direct primary care. I would have just said, I'm trying to do precision medicine, preventative medicine, proactive medicine. And basically in medicine today, for the most part, insurance pays based on disease and where you're at in a disease state. And of course, you have your yearly checkup. But even the way that we think about disease has been fairly short term. So, American College of Cardiology used to be a 10-year risk score that would determine whether you should start on a statin or Zetia or something like that. And they just came out last November with their 30-year risk score. So they took that and added 20 years so that we can see like what can we do to drive your risk down, not just over these 10 years, but actually over 30 years. And so for me, it was kind of reframing medicine. Can we move to where we don't deliver all of our best therapies and all of our best cares in the last 10 to 20 years of life, but can we start delivering the care at the right time to keep you healthier longer so that when you do get sick, it's for as short as possible at the end of your life? And so that's kind of the philosophy behind the practice I set up. And really, it was focused on, the main things that are going to kill somebody. And I break it down to health comes down to just kind of two things. One, don't die. And so look at the things, look at the things that are going to mostly kill people. So heart attack, stroke, cancer, dementia, and metabolic disease. And then lastly, like sarcopenia, losing muscle mass. So prevent those things. Look at all those things deeply, prevent those things. And then number two, like how can we keep you mobile and strong as long as possible? If you do those two things, you're going to live this long, healthy life. The other thing I'll put in there that I don't do a great job of in my practice yet is figuring out how to bring in the mental aspect, because you're not going to want to live forever or as long as you possibly can if you're not happy. Um, and I think people need help with that. But what we really tackle are those two things: how do you keep people as healthy as possible and moving as well as possible? And you can't do that in typical medicine just because you don't have the time, you don't have the resources, and so that's why we set up this practice with the hope, honestly, that we're building technology tools that I'm hoping someday I can share with regular primary care providers so they can start offering the same type of care, the same type of framework in a broader sense.
Yeah. Well, and none of us can see the future, but I think there's a day coming pretty soon where most medical care won't just be when you sit down with your doctor for 15 or 20 minutes.
Yep.
There'll be a lot of educational resources that are available for people on the internet, and most people have they have the entire internet in their hand when they carry their phone around. Even my
Yep.
patients who I would say are kind of lowest on the socioeconomic ladder have a nice phone, almost all of them. And
Yeah, that's
so
true.
you have this powerful tool that can help give you education. And I think, I'm a primary care doctor, so this is all the stuff you're saying is near and dear to my heart. If we can make those differences when someone's in their 20s and 30s, that dictates how they're going to live when they're in their 40s or 50s, which dictates how they're going to be in their 60s and 70s. And I've observed,
Yep.
just like you have, people in there's such a division between people as they age. As folks get to age 70, I have people who are running and participating in senior Olympic games, and they're out playing pickleball every day and deciding which peak they're going to go hike. And I have others who really don't go much farther from the couch back to the bathroom to the kitchen and back. And the
Yep.
difference in that wasn't, didn't start when they were 70. It started when they were 30 or 40. protracted over a lifetime, it has such a tremendous influence. And so I applaud what you're doing, Jared. I think it makes a huge difference for people.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, do you have any other things you want to share with our audience?
I think it comes down to what we talked about, focusing on the patient in front of you, having that why. I mean, you asked me at the beginning several reasons why be a doctor, and figuring out that why and going back to it, because sometimes you forget what that why is. And then those of our physicians, our brothers and sisters in this kind of sacred calling, I just kind of want to encourage all of them to know how important the work is that they do, that it matters to the person they serve today, it matters to the person they'll serve tomorrow, it matters to generations coming. And so it really is a privilege to work in this space, and it's really a privilege to work alongside other good men and women that are doing this work.
Yeah, totally agree. I read a statistic I told you before that said there's only just over 1 million licensed physicians in the U.S., which sounds like a big number, but relative to the population of the country, it's pretty small. And how many
Yep.
of those are in full-time clinical practice, and how many of those are partially retired? I mean, what you do really does make a difference, and I applaud people who stick with it, but you have to find a way to do it in a way that's meaningful to both your patients and to yourself, and doesn't produce sort of this burnout mentality that we've observed.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, hey Jared, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I've loved talking to you. You've had this amazing set of experiences that's kind of unique with the entrepreneurial side and starting some businesses, and your ER experience. And I think our listeners will find this fascinating. I've really enjoyed talking to you. So thank you again for doing that.
Well, this is a lot of fun, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'll talk to you later. Thank you.